let's turn in our Bibles to the last message in Acts chapter 19. Now, there's a little bit of opportunity to spend in Acts 20, but rather we're going to take a break. Next week, we're going to begin on 1 Corinthians, and then we're going to spend a number of months on 1 Corinthians because as Paul is in Ephesus, he's writing probably 1 Corinthians and maybe even 2 Corinthians as he has already sent Timothy ahead in order to prepare the way for him to eventually make his way to the church of Corinth. So we'll be looking at 1 Corinthians to understand some of the context of the things that are happening during that time, and then we'll jump back into Acts chapter 20 and finish off Acts as well as then going on with the rest of our sort of journey through the Bible, okay? I just wanted to remind you of this really funny event. I don't know if you saw it, but every time I listen to this video, it just makes me laugh, okay? Now, let me give you the setting just really quickly. October 13th, 2023 happened, and that was where Hamas ended up invading Israel. They, in a day, ended up killing around a little over 1,000 people, and it was just brutal and devastating, and Israel said, once again, never again are we going to allow that to happen. And they ended up having this attack that was more swift and more brutal than Hamas, with the goal of trying to completely eliminate Hamas from the face of the planet. Now, their response was so swift and so decisive that there were many, even schools across the nation, that ended up deciding to protest against Israel for what it was done. And they decided to participate in what's called a BDS movement: boycott, divest, and sanction. And so what that meant is that they would try to encourage their schools, their businesses, in order to try to boycott Israel. So don't go there, don't buy any Israeli products. Divest, so pull out any money that you have invested in Israel or invested in any other company that is invested in Israel. And then to sanction them to continue to say that we will not do business with anyone that does business with Israel. That was sort of that's the goal of the BDS movement. And so a lot of these protests on college campuses ended up breaking out against Israel for their swift response against the people who had attacked them and murdered over 1,000 people. Now, this particular protest that I have the picture on the screen, this particular protest was in NYC, the New York City. And it was at NYU, and a bunch of people had gathered around, and they were marching, and they were holding up signs like "Free Palestine," and they were also quoting this sort of mantra of "From the river to the sea, Palestine must be free." Okay, and I'll explain that just a second of how devastating that mantra is. So a few reporters went down in order to check out this riot, because not only were some people rioting, but they were also occupying places on campus. They were like taking the libraries over, they were taking whole swaths of the school over. There were hearings regarding this that you might remember, of saying, hey, what did you guys do about this? Right, and during one of the protests and these occupying movements that were going on, people were, chanting and saying, free, free Palestine, free, free Palestine, right? In the background, a reporter went up to this young woman and was like saying, so what are you protesting? And they're like, we're protesting for Palestine. He's like, okay, so like, what do you want to do? What are your goals here? And she's like, well, I'm actually from Colombia, and I don't even go to NYU, but I heard they were protesting, so I came down to join them. What exactly is NYU doing with Israel? She turned to a friend of hers, and then the friend said to her this: I don't know, I wish I was better educated. You're protesting, and you don't know what you're protesting? Hello? What's going on here? What is happening? Right? And a lot of people don't know, especially about this issue, what exactly they are protesting. For example, the mantra that I said, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free. What river are they talking about? Does anybody know? The Jordan River. What sea? Mediterranean. So from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, what lies in the middle? Israel. So from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free means what has to be gone for Palestine to be free? The nation of Israel. They are talking about the destruction of a nation. And a lot of the people, if you're like, you go from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free. What river? What sea? Pacific? No, they don't know. They don't understand it, yet they're still protesting. The only thing that they know, really, if you were to ask them, is they're against Israel and against what Israel is doing. And then if you ask them, then what needs to happen? The response really is, I don't know. They know what they're against, but they don't know what they're for. That is a problem. Because often, and this is not just a left problem, it's a right problem, it's a people problem, we gather around, we unify around things we are against. But that's not real unity. When I'm against something and you're against something, does that necessarily mean we are for each other? There's a brilliant theory by Heidegger called balance theory. And balance theory in communication, we use it. A lot of people don't even realize that you are using it, but companies use it all the time in order to try to help sell their products, especially when they ever want to get a celebrity endorsement. And according to Heidegger's balance theory, he was actually the first person to say, hey, we can mathematically decide or be able to conclude whether or not someone will have good feelings about a product and therefore more likely to buy it. And so people were interested, like, you can use math in like communication and in persuasion. And he was like, yes, let me show you. And so he posited that if I have a good relationship with you, right, that's a positive. Right? That assumes that you will then have a good relationship with me, because a positive and a positive, when you multiply it together, equals a positive, and things are the same. Things are good, we'll be able to continue that relationship, right? But if I have a positive relationship with you and you have a negative relationship with me, so you think there's a problem, now there's an imbalance, because a positive times a negative is a negative. And now something's gonna change. Either I'm gonna try to hyper-convince you, don't like me, please love me, right? And then you'll eventually be like, oh, okay, fine, right? Which usually doesn't work, right? But I might try to get you to like me in order to change you from the negative to the positive, and then it's balanced. Or I will realize that you don't like me, and I'll be like, well, if you don't like me, then I don't like you. Right? And then it's a negative relationship that I now have towards you, and that negative times the negative is a positive, and it's balanced. Things are going to stay that way. Very interesting theory. Now, it even works with threes, okay? Like in advertising. Let's say I like a celebrity or a sports athlete. Like I like Michael Jordan, or I like Steph Curry, or I like something else, right? And then that celebrity likes a product. They like Nike, they like Under Armour, right? They like something else. If I like them and they like something, positive times positive, then most likely I am going to like the product as well, right? Because if I don't like the product, then it's a positive times a negative. That's imbalance. So I might like the product. I'm more inclined to like the product because that's positive times positive. That's a positive. Now everything is in balance. We like balance, right? But here's the thing. What if a celebrity makes a mistake? and then most people don't like that celebrity, what happens? Well, that's why in many of the advertisements, they have something called a morality clause, which means if the celebrity does something bad, does something negative, then the product can be like, they don't speak for us anymore. We're done with them, because they're afraid of this happening. Let's say, and this really did happen, Tiger Woods likes Rolex watch. Now, as long as I like Tiger Woods, I am more inclined to like Rolex watch. But remember when he had that whole discovery that he got into a car accident? It was because he was cheating on his wife, and then we found out he was a serial adulterer. He had been cheating on his wife multiple times all over the country. He was actually addicted to sex. And a lot of people were like, oh, Tiger Woods, oh my gosh, no. And then now Rolex was like, we don't like him either. Why? Because if I don't like Tiger Woods and Tiger Woods likes Rolex, then in order to be balanced, what do I need? I need to hate Rolex, right? So negative times negative, positive times positive, we're balanced, right? We're balanced. But here is the most important part relating to our message today. In that theory, it recognizes something. If I don't like Tiger Woods and Tiger Woods doesn't like Rolex, that should be balanced. Negative times negative is a positive. Then shouldn't I have a positive relationship with Rolex? And the answer is, it doesn't work. At that point, the theory breaks down. Because if I have a negative view towards something, and somebody else has a negative view towards something else, there is no guarantee that I'm going to have a positive relationship just because both of us hate the same thing. And our world often tries to build itself on hate. If you remember back in 2016, the Republicans, when Trump first took office in his first administration, rallied around, we hate Obamacare. There was a bunch of people that hated Obamacare. They didn't want Obamacare. They wanted to repeal Obamacare. Let's get rid of Obamacare. And then they finally got into power, and they finally got a Republican Senate, and they got a Republican House, and they got a Republican president. Can they get rid of Obamacare? And they failed. Why? Because when it came time to govern, it wasn't enough just to hate something. Everybody asked, then what are you going to do? And they went, I don't know. Let's try this. No, we don't want that. Let's try this. No, we don't want that. Right? They could never decide on what they were for, only on what they are against. And that leads us to ask a question regarding people who unite. It doesn't matter who you are, if you're uniting around something negative, does that necessarily mean you have an ally? Is the enemy of my enemy my friend? The answer is no. So why not? Why can't we get along? Because we're both against the same things. Let's turn in our Bibles to the book of Acts chapter 19, verse 21. And look at this riot in Ephesus that takes place to show us that even though you might both hate the same thing, that doesn't guarantee you're going to be able to get along. Opposition does not mean unity. Acts chapter 19, starting in verse 21. Now, after these events, the events that we're talking about include all the stuff that has happened in Acts chapter 19. Paul going to Ephesus, having this incredible ministry, so powerful that he could just, dab himself with a handkerchief or something, and the Holy Spirit was working in such an amazing way that people would grab the handkerchief, run over to someone who's sick, throw it on the person who's sick, and that person would get well. The ministry in Ephesus was exploding. Okay? But as it's exploding, as people try to then copy Paul's power, remember the 7 sons of the high priest Sceva who tried to use Paul's name and Jesus' name in order to cast out a demon, right? People were trying to cash in on that. As that was going on, this took place. Now, after these events, Paul resolved in the spirit that he wanted to, he's not going to right now, but he wanted to pass through Macedonia and Achaia and go to Jerusalem, saying, after I've been there, I must also go to Rome. And having sent into Macedonia 2 of his helpers, Timothy and Erastus, he himself stayed in Asia for a little while. So he set his desire, but he's remaining in Asia. Now, here's what happens in Asia, in Ephesus. About that time, there arose no little disturbance concerning the way. Now, that's complicated to read, even in the Greek. What it means is there is a big, it says disturbance. It says no little, that means big. There's a big disturbance in Ephesus about the way, and the way was what they called Christianity, right? The way was what they called the church, because Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. So there was this big fight over the way. Why? There's this man, verse 24, named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Artemis, brought no little business to the craftsmen. These, the craftsmen, he gathered together with workmen in similar trade and said, men, you know that from this business we have our wealth. And you see here that not only in Ephesus, but almost all of Asia, Paul has persuaded and turned away a great many people, saying that the gods made with hands are not gods. And there is a danger. Not only that, this trade of ours may come into disrepute, but also that the temples of the great goddess Artemis may be counted as nothing, and that she may even be deposed from her magnificence, she whom all of Asia and the world worship. Now, verse 28, when they had heard this, they were enraged and they were crying out, great is Artemis of the Ephesians, great is the Artemis of the Ephesians, great is the Artemis of the Ephesians, so that the city was filled with confusion, and they rushed together into the theater, and they dragged with them Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians who were Paul's companions in travel. But when Paul wished to go into the crowd, the disciples would not let him. Even some of the Asiarchs, who were friends of his, sent to him and were urging him to not venture into the theater. Now, some cried out one thing and some another, for the assembly was in confusion, and most of them did not know why they had come together. So some of the crowd prompted Alexander, who was of the Jews. They had put him forward, and Alexander, motioning with his hands, wanting to make a defense to the crowd. But when the crowd recognized he's a Jew, for about 2 hours, they all cried out in one voice, great is Artemis of the Ephesians, great is Artemis of the Ephesians, great is Artemis of the Ephesians. And when the town clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, men of Ephesus, who is there who does not know that the city of Ephesians is the temple keeper of the great Artemis and of the sacred stone that fell from the sky? Seeing then that these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rash. For you have brought these men here who are neither sacrilegious nor blasphemers of our God or of our goddess. If therefore Demetrius and the craftsmen with him have a complaint against anyone, the courts are open, and there are proconsuls. Let them go and bring charges against one another. But if you seek anything further, I want you to say that the further here, literally in the Greek, means above or beyond the law. Okay? If you want something further, it shall be settled in the regular assembly. For we are in danger of being charged with rioting today, since there's no cause that we can give to justify the commotion. And when he had said these things, he dismissed the assembly. People gathered together against something. But it didn't fit. It didn't work. There's a reason why. Why? Why is opposition to the same thing not unifying? Let's find out. The passage starts with Paul saying, you know what? I think it's time. I've stayed in Ephesus for a couple of years. I think it's time to move on. And he wants to go to Macedonia and he wants to go to Achaia, which means he needs to sail from Ephesus up to the northern part of Greece and then probably again sail and make his way down through Athens and through Corinth. So to sort of show you, to remind you of the map, there is Paul in Asia in the city of Ephesus. The province is Asia, right? And Ephesus is the capital city of that province. He wants to go to Macedonia, and in Macedonia are three major cities that Paul has planted churches: Philippi, Thessalonica, and Berea. Okay? And those are the cities located there on the northern western part of your map. And then you go on south, and that's the province of Achaia, and Achaia is where Paul planted a church in Athens and where Paul planted a number of churches in Corinth. So he wants to go to those churches. He wants to, like he's been going to Derbe and Iconium and Lystra, strengthening those churches in Galatia. He wants to do the same thing now for Macedonia and for Achaia. But remember, he has kind of a goal here. He's thinking, I want to visit those churches first, and then I want to go back to Jerusalem, right? And then I want to go from Jerusalem to Rome. And his hope, as we know in the book of Romans, is that he wants to make the church in Rome, which is already planted and growing, he didn't start it, he wants to make it similar to what had been made by the church that sent him to be a missionary in the first place. And so he says, I want to go to Rome. I want to use you as a sending off church to go even further west. That's Paul's goal, okay? And he's explaining this. And in order to set the stage, in order to say, hey, I'm coming, sort of prepare your hearts, prepare the way for what I'm going to teach, he decides to send two people who have been faithful co-workers with Paul. He sends Timothy and he sends Erastus on ahead. So they're going to say, hey, we just wanted to find out what was going on in your churches. We're going to report back to Paul. That way Paul can be ready in order to help you really continue to grow and continue to develop your faith. That's the plan, okay? Which we'll find out the first letter of Corinth was part of this whole plan. Now, while he has sent people on ahead, this not a little disturbance happens. Okay? It wasn't little. It was huge. It encompassed the entire city. Everybody was talking about this. It was a major event. It was an occupation of the theater in opposition to the way, to the church, to what was growing and what was being developed in Ephesus. And so a united front gathered together. Now, how and why? It seemed that everything is going fine. Everything has been in Ephesus seeming to be swimmingly. There's been no riots. There's been just a little bit of an issue with the synagogues. Remember, some people got up and said to Paul, what are you doing? And Paul was like, all right, I don't want to cause trouble. And so he just moved out of the synagogues and he went someplace else in order to continue to teach and to preach and to grow the church. And it was growing. In fact, because it was growing so powerfully in Ephesus, the word of the Lord was spread throughout all of Asia. That whole sort of state of Asia, everybody was hearing about the gospel. And so the churches were being planted all over what is now modern day Turkey. So why did all of a sudden everyone break out and in opposition towards the gospel? Remember, the gospel was so powerful. Last week, we talked about people taking all of these books on magic and throwing it into a bonfire. And it was like $800,000 worth of material, right? All because they were getting rid of their magic, all because they were in favor of the gospel. Now, it seems that the tables have been turned. Well, what happened was this weasel by the name of Demetrius. And I do mean he's a weasel. This guy is not cool. He did not confront Paul openly. He did not do anything in order to try to really stand as a solid opposition against the gospel. He went and whined. Why? Because he's losing business. Well, what's his business? Dimitri's business is he's a silversmith, which means he probably has a mining company. He has some mines that are over near Ephesus where there's some silver veins that are going on. So he's sending people in order to dig in those veins, get out the silver. He knew how to melt it down. He knew how to get the raw ore of silver. And then he would take that raw ore of silver and he would deliver it to the craftsman. And the craftsmen could take the silver and they could shape it into shrines or into idols or into all kinds of things related to the patron goddess of the city of Ephesus, the Greek goddess Artemis. Artemis is the goddess of the hunt. Artemis is a pure goddess, sort of I know she's feminine, but she's also kind of masculine at the same time because it's like going out and hunting and always getting your prey and getting your target right. And so it's sort of this interesting duality. She was also a different goddess because a lot of the other goddesses had in order as part of their worship, they go to the temple and with a temple prostitute. It's gross. Okay, not Artemis. Not Artemis. Artemis was a goddess of perpetual virginity. So there was no shenanigans going around. And so a lot of the things around Artemis was pure, like pure silver. And so this guy made bank upon gathering the silver, making sure it was as pure as possible, delivering it to these craftsmen, to these artisans, and they would then shape it and mold it and make it into these little shrines and temples for people's homes so that they could then worship Artemis. And because more and more people were following the way, and they were getting rid of their temple shrines, they were not buying them anymore, he was losing business, he was losing market share. He complained. And he complained to the people who were also losing business, those craftsmen that were no longer able to sell the shrines. And he went to them and he said, hey, we're losing business. We're losing money. We've gotten rich doing this sort of Artemis grift. I got the silver, I gave it to you, you shaped it into the shrines, we sold it, you made money, I made money. We're losing money. Why? Because of this guy named Paul. Paul has persuasively told everybody about this way and basically said that the gods that I'm finding the silver in order to give to you that you're making with human hands, those aren't real gods. That's what Paul says. So he's destroying your business. Not only this, but we were selling this stuff all over Asia. It's not just here in Ephesus. But people would come to Ephesus and they'd see the great temple and they'd be like, oh, I think Artemis is kind of cool. And they're buying from you because this is a major trade city. This is a capital. We're losing business all over the place because of Paul and because everybody is now going to worship his God, then worship our God of Artemis. And everybody got ticked because they're losing money. They're losing followers. They're losing their career. And out of fear, they all then started to shout together, great Artemis of the Ephesians. She is awesome. She is great. We follow her. We don't follow the way. We follow Artemis. Yay, Artemis. And they're all chanting, Artemis, Artemis. And they gather this crowd together and they rush upon the place where the Christians were generally meeting, which is in a theater in the city. And they run in and they grab two people associated with Paul, who's probably in the city just leading a Bible study, for God's sake. And they grab a guy by the name of Gaius, and they grab another person by the name of Aristarchus. They were both Macedonians, so they were from either Philippi, Thessalonica, or Berea. They had been traveling with Paul, ministering to Paul, probably even sending money in order to help Paul and fund part of his missionary endeavors while he was in Ephesus. So they're helping him They get grabbed as they were teaching probably a Bible study or something in the theater, pulled into the theater as part of this riot, saying, as everyone is chanting, "Great is Artemis." But notice the very top. It says that the city was filled with confusion. Why? Because they were against the way. Now, what does that mean that happened? The artisans were saying, "Great is Artemis." But then they were also saying, "So let's get Paul, or let's get the church, or let's get the way." And then you have some Jews in the synagogue as this mob begins to grow, "Get Paul, get the way, get Paul, get the way." Right, and they're like, they're attacking Paul. Cool. And they join in. Right? So now you have the more and more people going to get Paul, and they're like, "Well, why are you here? I hate Paul. I hate Paul too. Let's go get him." Right? And they're, as a riot going out, "Let's just get Paul, get Paul, get Paul." And they're like, "Well, who are you for? I'm a Jew." Ugh. "Who are you for?" "I'm Artemis." Ugh. Right? So they're not united except in their opposition. And we're going to find out how it's not going to work. The reason why this works, at least for now, in the initial stages, is because it's easy to start something if you're against the same thing, right? If you hate something and I hate something, we can fuel each other's hatred, right? You don't like this, I don't like it either. It's like, you don't like cucumbers, I don't like cucumbers. Let's hate cucumbers. Right? Let's be against something. We can unite, obviously, in opposition. But then it's like, well, what do we do about cucumbers? We don't know what to do. We don't know the positive outcome that's supposed to happen. We just know what we hate. Make sense? And that's what leads to confusion. That's what leads to deconstructive ends, because we're only united in opposition. And we've seen this even recently. I don't know if you notice, there has been no small amount, which means there's been a large amount. There's been a large amount of protests against our current government. And you can go out and you can ask the protesters, what is it that you're protesting? And unitedly, they'll all say, "We hate Trump, anti-Trump. Trump sucks. Trump is of the devil. Trump is fascist. Trump is bad. We hate Trump." Really? What do we do about it? Look at the sign. Same protest. "Stop Elon." He's not working for the government anymore, by the way. But let's stop him from doing what? Making Teslas? I kind of like Teslas. Well, what are we stopping him from doing? Right? And then there's the other one, which is like, "I will not be a farm slave for Bobby Brainworms." That's Bobby Kennedy, by the way. He is working for the federal government in the Department of Health and Human Services. But a farm slave? Has he asked you to work on the farm? He hasn't asked me to work on the farm. What is he talking about? I'm wondering who exactly has the brainworm here. Right? They're all against Trump, but they have no idea what they're really angry against. They just know Orange Man bad. That's it. That's all they know. And it's easy to get people started. But when you actually think, like, okay, so you don't like him, what do you have in alternative? Who do you want to be president? You ask these people, who do you want to be president? A bunch of them are like, Kamala Harris. All right, she tried, right? Other people say, Gavin Newsom. Right? Just a small amount say that. Very small. Some people are saying like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and maybe Jasmine Crockett, but nobody is united around who. They just don't want the orange man. Okay? That's what's happening. And what ultimately occurs is what we're seeing in our culture is there's a whole lot of confusion and not a lot of unity. So what do you do about that kind of disparity? What do you do about people who are just getting together because of their hate, but they don't really know what to do? Well, Paul had an idea, and his idea was to go into the crowd and to try to, offer himself up as a peace offering to get people to calm down. Then he would debate anybody that was there in order to convince them that this was not necessary. And so as Paul was thinking, hey, maybe I should go, the other Christians were like, no, you don't. That would be like Trump going to the DNC and saying, why does everybody hate me? Boo! Right? Nobody's going to listen to him there. It doesn't help. It's only going to stoke the hatred. And so his friends were saying, no, don't, you can't stay, can't go, not there. Okay? And so Paul was like, are you sure? Well, even some of I can't pronounce this word now. The Asiarchs were they were not governors, but they were responsible for a lot of the ceremonial stuff that happened in the city. So they're like responsible for the theater, and they're responsible for ceremonies that support Rome, that highlight the emperor. They were kind of the movers and shakers of the culture in the city. Some of them were Paul's friends. They liked Paul. They appreciated what Paul was doing. They know that the way wasn't bad, but they were looking at this mob, and they recognized, Paul, nothing good is going to come from a mob. Don't go. And so they forbade him from going. They kept him back. He didn't end up going. Then what is going to happen to these poor people? Like, what's going to happen to Gaius and his friend? Right? Indeed, some people were crying out, death to Paul. Other people were crying out, long live Artemis. She's a goddess? What? Right? And they were all saying different stuff, that there was no harmony. The only thing uniting them was their displeasure, their anger, their hatred, their frustration. And it wasn't getting any better. Because they couldn't actually get a consensus, a decision on where to go, a bunch of people kind of pushed a guy by the name of Alexander, like, hey, you say something. What am I going to say? No, tell them, get them on our side. Let them know that we can explain why Paul is so bad using the law. Sure, I should say something? Yeah, go say it. And so poor Alexander gets pushed into the limelight, and he's like, all right, okay, people, settle down. All right. I want to say something to you all. And so people began to quiet down. So what, he's going to say something? And then someone recognized, he's a Jew! And rather than listening to him, even though he's like raising his hands to say, hey, quiet down, it just fueled their anger more, and they all started shouting again, great is Artemis of the Ephesians, great is Artemis of the Ephesians, great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Like, I tried. They couldn't unite. He couldn't explain anything. They kept their anger, their frustration. It was only being fueled even by the division that was there. You see, given time, when you're not for something, when you're both against something, those differences will appear. If we're just against a unified thing, whether we're against Trump or whether we're against Obamacare or whether we're against anything that's in the culture, being in opposition to something doesn't unite people together. It doesn't encourage people. It doesn't help anyone grow. Now, why do I say this? Because the church outside these doors only recognizes what we are against, not what we are for. And that's what matters. They recognize people in the church as being against homosexuals, against transgender, against equity and harmony that they see is wanted in the society. We disagree with what people are choosing to do with their life, but it doesn't mean it should never mean that we are against them. I have people in my life who are not binary in the way that we know it. They either don't identify as a boy or a girl, or they are homosexual, or they are something that is not what we as a church should agree with. I'm not against them. I pray, I hope someday they will change. And it seems in one case, there has been some shift, which is good, which is a positive. But we cannot be known for what we are against. We must be known for something else. Because if we're only known for what we're against, even in our church, those differences will appear, and it will fracture and destroy our church. This scribe, we don't even know his name. He's a scribe. He's an official. He's someone that takes notes. He's a glorified secretary. He stands up and he starts to speak to the crowd. And this is the largest part of this story, his speech, which means Luke finds it very important. And he focuses on this as to why this type of assembly doesn't work. First thing he says is everybody knows about Artemis. Everybody knows that Ephesians or that Ephesus is a city dedicated to Artemis. That's not in dispute. You know it, I know it, the world around us knows it. Okay? They know that about us. But then he says this is undeniable, which makes it necessary to restrain you from performing something rash. He says, hey, we all agree Artemis rocks, okay? Since we all agree to that, don't be rash about it. Don't allow that to stir up your anger. Don't make that a part of what you're doing right now, because it could lead to a rash decision, like grabbing Gaius for no real reason and doing something to him that you might regret. Because he says, for you lead these men, Gaius and his friend, Aristarchus, you lead these two men here. They're not temple robbers and they're not blasphemers of our God. What's that mean? It means he was a scribe, knowledgeable enough about these two men that he knows they're not criminals. And you have grabbed them and you've brought them here without any form of criminal complaint. And he goes on to say, hey, if there is a criminal complaint, Demetrius has a problem against these two guys, let him file his complaint the right way. The assembly is open, the proconsuls are here, we can take care of this legally. But what you're doing is a mob, and mob is very easily to lead to violence. And often that violence goes against the innocent. That's what anger, that's what hatred does. Here's the interesting part. Neither anger nor hatred are wrong. God gets angry. He is angry over sin. He is angry over destruction. In fact, God says that he hates sins. In Proverbs, it says, 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him. God hates, he gets angry. It doesn't mean that those things are wrong. Here's the problem. When our anger, when our hatred are stirred up by a mob, where we fuel it not against something specific, but against kind of a direction, it's really easy to see that anger and that hatred turn into violence, especially against people who haven't really done anything, like Gaius and Aristarchus. We saw that in our country. We saw that in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. You had that unfortunate experience with George Floyd, and from that sparked up an organization called Black Lives Matter. And you had protests all over the country arguing against what the police were supposedly doing against the black community. And in those protests, many people were killed. They lost their lives. And they weren't even doing something wrong. There was one poor guy, I remember, he just went out in order to try to support his friend's pawn shop. He was a cop. He was off duty. His pawn shop was undergoing these mobs, constantly going back and forth. He was worried about it catching fire and burning to the ground, and he'd lose his job, his business, his livelihood. He called his friend and said, "Could you help?" And this off-duty police officer went there in order to protect his friend's pawn shop store, and he was beaten to death. Not because he did anything wrong, but because he was helping his friend. He was innocent. And the mob just fell upon him and destroyed him. We have seen mob violence do the same types of things in the various LA riots that we had. With Rodney King, you had riots break out all over the city, and I remember the mob ended up grabbing a trucker, pulled him out of his delivery truck, beat him near to death, and one guy, there was a picture of it on the news, one guy picked up a brick and threw it at his head and walked away like he was the champion for violently abusing the innocent. Anger without clear direction and understanding, just fueled by a mob mentality, destroys innocence. It ruins lives. And that's what the scribe was trying to say. Don't be foolish. Don't allow your anger to go uncontrolled. Don't have a mob mentality. Think. What has these people done that's wrong? If you can find it, write a criminal report about it. Otherwise, let them go. Because, he said, you might be seeking something that's beyond the law. Now, here's where I struggle. I understand what the ESV is saying, but there's a little bit of ambiguity here in the Greek. He said, if you're seeking something beyond the law, you will explain it to the assembly. That could cut two ways. The way that the ESV says it is, hey, if you're looking for anything more, go talk to the assembly about it, like go to court. But this guy also seems to be using it as a little bit of a veiled threat, where he's saying, hey, if you do go beyond the law, then it's you who are going to have to explain what you do to the assembly. In other words, you're going to be brought up on charges. The very thing you're trying to destroy is now going to be, using the law, destroying you. Is that what you want? He says, I'm in danger of charging you with a rebellion. A rebellion because none of you can tell me what this riot is actually about. Some of you are saying, death to Paul. Some of you are saying, long live Artemis. Some of you are saying, we love God. Nobody knows. It's just confusion. It's just chaos. It's not civilized. So after saying these words, he just says, go home. And everyone's like, oh, okay. And they get dismissed. Because they were just against someone. They didn't know what they were for. And real unity doesn't come in our opposition. It comes from our united value and effort. We have to be for something in order to be united as we do what we are called to do. So why? Why is the enemy of my enemy not my friend? Even though it seems to work in the beginning, there's no unity in being against something. We can only find unity when we are for the same thing. And we, as a church, know that the ultimate unity only comes for us being for the Lord Jesus Christ. And that's the beauty of it. Here in our congregation, we have all kinds of different people from all kinds of different backgrounds. We have Chinese, we have Vietnamese, we have Korean, we have white, we have all kinds of people, Japanese. Why can we be united? Not because we are against some other culture, but because we're for the Lord Jesus Christ. Not because we are in opposition towards anything, but because we all want to do what God has called us to do. That brings power. That brings unity. So I encourage you, even in your conversations, stop talking about what you're against and start proclaiming the Jesus that we are all for.